because they really form the basis for how we are actually going to make changes to those practices. So of course, as we begin to make changes to practices, we obviously want to ensure that we still stay true to these. So for example, if we're going to add lots and lots of work to the system, we might be violating SAFe principle number 6, where we're not managing flow, excuse me, where we're not managing flow or managing the capacity of the teams. Maybe we're not prioritizing work, so we're not dealing with principle number 1, making good economic choices there. So moving on to number 2, the second thing that's really important is, you see this a lot where people implement SAFe in name only, right? So this is often when people bring this into the organization with the intent, and what they do is they just put a wrapper of SAFe around their current sets of practices. And so we see this all the time, with organizations, that they still continue to behave with the waterfall approach, building up large documents up front, doing a lot of phase-gated approaches, and they divide SAFe up into, doing phase gates, and they have the analysis and design, and so they fit SAFe into the analysis and design. This is the same thing that befell Scrum when Scrum was created. Scrum was never intended to be a framework that sat inside waterfall, but that was the only way organizations were able to understand it, because there was no real guidance provided on Scrum as to how to avoid that. So SAFe tends to be looked at as, oh, it's for large projects, and therefore, we'll put this SAFe wrapper around what we do. We'll change the names of things and we'll do other things. So we tend to want to move away from this too. And, the signs and symptoms, like the governance says we're doing this, we have to do SAFe, we have to do SAFe differently. That's my favorite one. You come to many organizations and they will all say, well, we're different and we do things differently. And sure enough, many organizations, do have nuances about them, but often the way they have the same sorts of challenges, and solving those challenges often takes, similar approaches. So usually the we have to do it differently mindset is really because they're looking at how they're measured or how they perform, or it's the politics of the organization or the structures, and they just want to avoid, trying to do that. And people obviously being stressed and overloaded comes when people are rushing that implementation. They haven't taken the time for education. And so they're moving very quickly towards this, getting it up and running, but they don't understand how to actually ingrain the structure of SAFe, and that it's really meant to change the organization. And it's, it's not about just doing projects. So some of the root causes for this is you're seeing that, they're expecting the benefits of lean agile, but they're still doing the same, preserving their legacy practices, which I've been talking about. The mindset hasn't changed. And this is usually because leadership hasn't taken the time to go through the education. And so they're implementing something that they don't truly understand. They think they understand it, but they don't truly understand it. So the guidance here that we give to people is, we talk about this a lot in module 2 in leading SAFe, which is that leadership are the only ones that can change the system. And in order to do that, they have to understand what it is they're committing to, and they have to lead that action, right? So the values and the principles form the basis for their decision-making, right? And they have to then be involved. They tend to implement, can implement this notion of strangle patterns, which is you don't have to phase everything out at once. You can phase some things in over time. So the things that are really difficult to phase out, so funding, for example, is one of the most common problems where you can't make that change early on. So we often figure out a way to manage funding for SAFe, but over time we are addressing the movement from, a cost center budgeting model to a lean and agile budgeting model. Okay, so obviously reading the articles is something that, we want people to do. So again, as you're implementing SAFe, training is the critical key thing that you're going to be able to do to have that common conversation. Actually, you've got this picture from it, so it's kind of a cool picture. So there's this other thing where we focus on vanity metrics. So I've seen lots of organizations that tend to focus on those metrics that don't really express progress or capability increase. What they tend to show, what they tend to satisfy is our need to hear that we're doing something correctly. So for example, website visits or number of people trained, those tend to be vanity metrics. While some number of people trained can be valuable, but ultimately it's not moving you forward to getting results. So we want to make sure that we're focused on solid metrics. So signs and symptoms for this, touting the number of ARTs launched, people trained as the primary measure of a successful SAFe implementation. Now, as I said, that's not it's not invaluable. It is valuable to understand progress of the transformation, but for the train itself, it's not going to be that valuable, right? Because for an organization, just saying I've got several thousand people trained in SAFe doesn't mean that you've actually implemented well or made any change across the organization. So we do see a lot of organizations doing this. Some of the reasons this happens is because often the way some of the executives are measured is, one of the terrible executive measurements is number of people trained, instead of asking for, was there an outcome from that training? Sorry, there's another person coming in. Okay. So overly focused on the steps of the roadmap. So this becomes one of the root causes where we look at these steps in the roadmap and we don't really understand, how things track. So we want that LACE, to be involved with us here and to guide these implementations so that, as we launch ARTs, we begin to identify, well, what are the appropriate metrics for different particular ARTs to be managing, because each ART may have its own particular business metrics, but they will all have common metrics like number of people trained, etc. One of the things that we had here earlier, like one of our customers is the FBI. And so we, not me, I wasn't involved in this, but a framework team did sit down with them. They did lunch and learn with them about their progress. And, one of the comments that the FBI made to us was, the implementation of SAFe at the FBI has actually helped to remove dangerous criminals off the street. So that's a statement that they gave us. And so when you think about it, think about that as a metric. If you can directly correlate, the capability of your organization to improving its capability to detect and identify dangerous criminals and remove them, that's a big impact, if it could be done faster. So it was kind of humbling to see that they do that. And we have, in all of our customer stories, as you go through them on our website, you will see there are lots of good stories, and metrics up there that talk to how organizations have managed to change and what they focused on. Let's go down to here. So the guidance we have is that we coach business owners on the value. So again, we're after the value that we want to deliver. We're not focused on the process. We're not focused on the people. I mean, those are subsequent to that. We want the value. And so, as a common metric we have in there, we talk about this thing called the predictability measure. And a lot of people think it seems, when you first look at it, and business owners assigning value to PI objectives, and then we roll those things up to give a percentage of predictability for the train, it seems a little light, but it's very powerful. Because when a train reaches something like 85 or 90% predictability, what that says to the business and to the customers is that when that train commits to its objectives, there's a 90% chance they're going to deliver on those objectives. And so that's a powerful thing. You can also use that to compare against cost. If you're a 90% predictable train and it costs you $1 million per PI, now you have an understanding of how much value you're actually getting for the amount of money. So you can do some correlation with this. Going further with critical measures in your context. So again, drilling down in your own context to look at, well, what other kinds of factors, depending on your product you're serving or the operations you're particularly working with, what other kinds of metrics would you bring in to measure as the Agile release train is running and you're delivering and launching capability. So moving on to number 4, prioritizing Agile ceremonies over excellence. So this one's a bit of a lighter one, but the train the portfolio 11s, we really describe, they're valuable things that we do, but they're not they're not everything. We need to, they shouldn't be the focus over, over making the outcome. So the demos themselves, don't have an outcome. The management of the Kanban board itself doesn't have an outcome. What we want to measure is the overall outcome. So if I measure at the portfolio level, I want to see, it's great that they might do an epic writing workshop, but what I want to see is well-written epics that flow through the system. I want to see metrics for prioritization. I want to see that, they define, an MVP, and we measure the metrics against that MVP, and there's a process for then approving the remainder of the epic. So we want to see those sorts of things as the overall view of what's going on, not just holding the event itself. So signs and symptoms of this is, PI planning is a Hollywood caliber event. I love when they put this here. So in other words, it's great. You should always try and make your PI planning events interesting. At Scaled Agile, we always have a theme for our PI planning event, and people come dressed, they make an effort to do stuff for that. So you always want to, but the preparation and the work shouldn't overshadow what we want as the outcome. So you really want to make sure that, it's not the glitz and glamour that count, or the ceremonies themselves, but you walk out of that room with, a good plan for the next 10 weeks with the dependencies identified and a set of PI objectives. So the organization invests regularly in events like ALM tools and neglects their automation and architecture. So again, tool investment is important, but overall results. So again, we want to make sure the CI/CD pipeline, continuous integration, continuous delivery pipeline is one of the most valuable things you will invest in. So ensuring that we're automating that, ensuring we're providing the development and testing capability and the deployment capabilities there become critical to be able to actually get the outcomes. And it's not just about this ceremony. So some of the root causes, right? Decreasing technical depth outside of the team. So again, with all the teams coming in, we need to ensure that we train and build that capability. Things like specialized coaches might be things that we need to do, sending people for the right kinds of training, even if it's outside of us and the organization. One of the other thing is adopting technologies too quickly. So again, as technologies come along, like a good example right now is artificial intelligence, something I'm going to talk on at Scaled Agile India, which is as that's coming along, people are beginning to grab at it and try to understand, well, how can I use this very quickly? Now, some organizations are being pretty successful at this, like Porsche, for example, is being very successful with this, but other ones end up just in a quagmire of lots and lots of large data that's not somewhat poorly organized, and they're running our AI algorithms against this, and they're not getting the results they want, or they don't know how to consume those results back into their agile release train. And so, as technology changes, we really need to think carefully about how we begin to adopt new technologies into the execution of the agile release train. So the guidance usher is the reverse training movers. So teams training leaders. So again, we want to ensure leaders remain involved so that the leaders see what the teams do, and in some ways the teams are leading leadership. So this is kind of like, I like the term, you heard of training from the back of the room. This is kind of like leading from the back of the room. Leadership step up when they need to, when they have to overcome problems, but they let the teams lead the way. Empower the teams, make them smart, give them the right training, give them clarity of a vision, clarity of the mission to be done, and then let them, make the decisions and solve the problems. Cross-organizational support. So if your organization doesn't have sets of communities of practice, these can be really, these are a low-cost, high-fidelity way of increasing engagement across your organization and increasing knowledge. So initially, we see this a lot with organizations when they're first beginning to, so I'm just going to check my time here. When they're first beginning to implement SAFe, we see them, do lots of role-based communities of practice. So you don't have to wait till the end. Then we also see some of the development things. We start to see DevOps kind of oriented ones and development oriented, communities of practice and testing ones. And, we might see some around, some of the things that we do in SAFe, short-lived ones might be for weighted shortest job first or prioritization type of things. So these become very important parts of this, and the relentless learning that is obviously built into this. So these become really important parts for us that, we want the ceremony, but it's not about the ceremony, it's about the outcome. I'm trying to remember the name of the movie this comes from, but it's not in my head. I can remember the soundtrack to the movie, but I can't remember it. So moving on to this one, accepting dependencies as immutable. So one of the things that you tend to go into is that you look at dependencies between trains. So we tend to begin to identify these where we go into PI planning and we see large amount, we know there's going to be lots of dependencies, but we assume that, well, that's always the way, but it's not always true, right? The dependencies aren't always there. If we design the train properly from the very beginning, when we go back to the value stream workshop, if we begin designing these things, properly, then we can begin to reduce the dependencies, and they're not always immutable. We can do things to reduce them. So the program board is one of those things that we often use to identify these. And so, the program board might look like a yarn factory, so if you have it all, you just see a lot of lines and dependencies. So this just means that we have a lot of dependencies, which tells us that we may have an issue with the way we've designed the teams, with the way we may have actually organized the development value stream and the trains themselves. And so we want to address those early on as we can, but we may have to go back and do some redesign work if we want to reduce those. If you do have a lot of dependencies, it's always good to consider how you can go back and begin to reduce those, even if it means some redesign work. Okay, the value delivery getting slower. So again, you're getting bottlenecks, you're getting held up by dependencies. So, if you're starting to see that, we obviously don't want that because, our goal is value delivery. So we want to start to improve that. So the root cause of this is the lack of understanding where SAFe is to reduce the dependencies via team and art formation. And so the first place you can look is when you pull together your development value stream. You can have a look at what product is that development or what solution is that development value stream serving? Is it going to be able to serve as a whole? Is it made up of a lot of independent components? Do I have people across really distributed time zones? So how am I going to organize the people that can really actually build toward that solution? As we form those groups of people into agile release trains and into teams, how can I reduce the dependency on each other between, from a technical perspective and from a flow perspective? And so we want to begin to focus on that. So the guidance here is, releasability, independent releasability is what we really want. Every agile release train, if you should be able to release independently of another. So if you're working on a large solution, they should be able to release components independently. Teams should be able to have, as much independence as possible for the things that they build and those things that are then, integrated into each other and then released by the train. Investments in architecture and tooling become important here too, because they also create, they reduce dependency. So architectural investments using microservices and other kinds of good architectural patterns help the teams be able to not have to wait on other teams or not have to be dependent on other teams to get something else done on their behalf. Another one too that's not on here really is ensuring you have the right people across the train. So a little investment into your shared services is always an important discussion early on. If you think you have very unique constraints and you don't have enough of those people, use them as shared services and have them spend time with different teams in order to skill those teams, with that kind of knowledge and capability so that you're not dependent on those shared services. There was a book called Team Topologies, which actually takes a different view of how we organize things. And so we look at stream aligned teams, component teams, we look at platform teams, and enable a team. So it has a better architecture for how we might decide to design the teams. And we often extend that to the train. So if you look up team topologies in the framework, you can read that. I think it's in the team article to start with. So getting on to the last one here, I want to make sure I'm leaving. John, we finish at what time?
So we've got plenty of time because you are the only speaker for today, but we will probably kind of finish around 7:30 on speaking, and then we can do Q&A and discussion, if that works.
Okay, well, I think I've only got 2 more, so we may be finished a little earlier than 7:30. All right, so let's look at this on organizational capacity and, overloading of that capacity. So this is an important one because we all get very familiar with managing the team. So anyone who's been doing Agile for a while begins to understand the relationship between a team's velocity and the capacity. The velocity being how much work they can do, the capacity we say for the sprint, and then the load against that. So people get pretty comfortable with that, but this is not the only place where this occurs. So we also want to understand that, SAFe is a broad system that goes across the organization for delivering value. So as we're pulling these people together, we're working on a broader basis. It's not just a team, but we've got a group of people managing the product side of this. And then we've got a strategic side of the portfolio. So we have to manage the flow of work. Any issues with the flow of work at the portfolio or down to the product level start to flow down to the team levels, and we start to get those interruptions to flow. So overloading, capacity is an important thing. So again, predictability remains low. So if teams are overloaded, then what we do tend to find is their predictability to deliver goes down, because more often than not, the flow of work for them is being disrupted. They've got too much work going on, no ability to react to sudden changes, etc. The time to mission capability is slow. So again, we're not able to produce things or deliver things at the speed that we would like. A lot of frequent replanning is a common one. You see this all the time, that we haven't, because we've overloaded things, we've got poorly written epics, we've got poorly written features and, and enablers. And so they get put into PI planning regardless, because we have to move forward, and those then just create confusion. And so you get confusion in PI planning, and you often get confusion throughout the PI. And of course, you get the burnout and low employee satisfaction. And so again, as Deming said, any, or was it Reiner said, I can't remember, any system that operates at 100% capacity is an economic disaster, right? So I think it's Reiner, sorry, that said this. So what you want to have is make sure that you have, enough buffer in the system that you're allowing the system to react to unexpected things or to changes that we might need to make. So the root causes here is organizational capacity is not understood, visualized, or respected. So again, if you go take a look at this, you might not find Kanbans used. So there's no visualization, there's no management of the flow of work. The concept of batch size is not well understood or well implemented. And so, you want to be looking at the portfolio level and see, do they have a Kanban in place? Are there WIP limits on the Kanban? Do they have exit criteria on the different columns of the Kanban? Are they truly managing the flow? One of the common things you see there is people put an extra column or a line at the bottom, and they leave it in the same line, but they just keep stacking things down the bottom like they're still waiting. And so it's kind of a bit of a band-aid for a Kanban. So guidance around this is, you want to visualize flow, you want to reduce batch sizes, we want to automate everything to improve our capability to, to actually, automate the work and make it flow faster. So we want to train and implement an LPM. So again, if you have an untrained portfolio, then they tend to just push lots and lots of work downwards because they're not controlling their pace. And that means the teams and the programs or the arts below become overwhelmed because too much work is coming to them. We want to make sure that we introduce a good LPM, a Kanban, with the WIP limits. We want to introduce the notion of letting the teams or letting the trains pull work rather than the work be pushed. We want to do this portfolio level problem solving workshop. So again, we want to use, say, something like the business agility assessment to start to identify where points of improvement for the train in terms of flow, So we want to be able to look at those. And so the problem solving workshop is looking at how does work flow through the system, how are we managing that work. So here we're very interested in the process. Okay, empowering leaders to stop doing decisions. So again, empowering the train, below. This seems kind of weird, but, for the agile release train, to actually be able to say, no, we're not going to take any work, we're at full capacity, or if something's blowing up there, being able to say, we've underestimated a set of features, or other things have come in as an emergency, and we need to reduce some of the workload in our backlog. And so we want to make sure the trains and the teams are all empowered to actually control on. It's kind of no different to what Toyota implemented, where any individual could stop the line, right? So we also want the teams and the trains to be able to look at this and say, you know what, something's wrong. Let's reduce the load of work in the system. Yeah. Okay, so the last one is relying on opinion over data. So one of the most common things we tend to do is we tend to make decisions based on conjecture or educated conjecture. So we're with executive teams and teams, they know a lot about what's going on, but they don't really have the data. And so this is one of those things where we want to ensure, is the organization really beginning to invest into data and data analytics so that we can actually start to pull real data, not only from our production environments, but from our development environments, so we can understand how it is we're performing and what things we can actually do to make changes to this. So this becomes a pretty important thing here. So one of the things that you will tend to see is that the patterns keep repeating, but you keep getting the same results. So decisions are still made based on, what some people feel are the right decisions, but you still don't get the right results. So lots of meetings filled with I think, or the boss wants, or, the customer said we have to have this, and that's a funny one. When the customer says we have to have this, it's like, oh, that's really important, but that may not be what all the customers want. So, you have to be careful about even with the customer information. So an over-reliance on anecdotal evidence. So again, we want hard evidence. We want to put in place good data and data analytics so that, as we look at the data that comes from our production environment, as you look at the data that comes from our CI/CD pipeline, we can begin to understand, well, what changes should we make based on these? So for example, if our predictability measure is low, we might start looking towards the data that we get from our business agility assessment to say, well, we've got a flow problem. Or the teams are not really good at, a continuous integration. So we have to start looking at those sorts of things because, the data, as we like to say at SAFe, the facts are friendly. So real data is becoming the key thing. And as we move forward, into another age of next digital age, which is going to be the age of AI, it becomes even more important because we're going to be moving even faster. So we need to collect and produce that data quickly. So the facts are friendly. And so we always want to use facts first and make decisions around those. So every PI, at the PI system demo, we're looking at the facts and we're beginning to make decisions, at the PI demo and at planning. Portfolio should be extracting data, from the product side of thing and from the development side of thing, being able to make choices about how we build and manage our trains and how we're actually implementing our products. Leaders need to become data fluent. So investing into data science and data analytics is becoming a key capability or a critical capability for a lot of, digital implementations. And some of those are SAFe implementations. And leaders need to become data fluent. So leaders need to take some education courses so they can get understand, well, how do I read the data? You're going to need an investment in tools so that you can extract data and present it back in ways that are meaningful. All right, so we've kind of whizzed through these top 7 things. We've got plenty of time for some questions and some other discussions. So with that, you probably have burning questions as we went through. So I hope you kind of wrote those down as we went. So I'm just trying to get out my presentation here. What questions do you have? Let's have some discussion.
Feel free to just unmute yourself or put it in the chat.
Hey, Gerald, this is Prakash.
Hey, Prakash.
Again, nice to hear from you again. I am one of your students from SPC trainings, and I have a question with regards to the PPM matrix. That is, as you mentioned, if a trend has somewhere around 85 to 90 kind of predictability, it's definitely good. I want to put a scenario where we are looking at the objective which are committed as the ones which the team should be able to complete, right? And the uncommitted objectives, the team may have one or two of them. If we are talking about 7 to 8 total objectives for the PI, and if the team completes all the committed objectives, then the metric becomes 100, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if they are also able to complete one of the stretch objective, so the number may go to 110 or 20. So for the last some time, that is the scenario that we are having. So most of the teams, they complete their committed objectives unless there is something which stops them, and also they complete, if not always, but at times many of the teams also complete say one of the uncommitted objectives too. And at times, if things go very well as we plan, they also complete the second uncommitted objective. And the trend is something that we see is around 90 to 110 is the number, or that is the number that we have, and we are quite sure that team will be in this number. So since SAFe suggests that we should be there in 80 to 100 is the number. So do you think there is something which we need to look upon, or based on the current scenario, we should be good?
Yeah, a little bit depends on how well the objectives are written, and is the business, are we truly able to measure the objective, right? So one of the things that happens here is the business come along and they sit down and they talk to the team and they read through the PI objective, and they might have an understanding about what they think is going to live, but the objective is not written in a format that's really measurable. So again, what happens is we get to the other side and the outcome becomes a bit of, opinion and conjecture. It's like, did you really, if we're looking at making a 20% reduction in say defects or something like that, then are we really able to measure that? But if it's written in such a way that, when I see metrics, when I see PI objectives early on, teams tend to write them, I'm delivering this functionality, I'm delivering X, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And they're not, the business understand that and they're like, oh, I want that. But what they're not doing is putting something in there for the business to be able to measure, did you do that? And so the end result is a discussion, and they tend to give them something close to the equal number. So the question is so the thing that I'm trying to say here is the system working well where the business is truly able to evaluate the PI objective as a well-written PI objective? Are they then truly able to have a conversation and measure the result of that objective, as they get to the system demo or even before the system demo? How are we representing that result? One of the things a good train should do is look at the PI objectives, and either the system team might do this or the teams themselves. If they put a hard metric in there, how are they going to show that they've met that metric? So if they put a performance metric in there, means for their demo, they need to write some code that shows that they were able to actually create some performance improvement, right? So they can actually see that they've achieved that goal. That being said, it is, we do say we want teams above 80%. Can they go above 100%? Of course they can. The system of PI objectives and uncommitted objectives is designed in such a way that if a team meets all their PI objectives and some of their uncommitted objectives, of course they can, right? They can take them above 100%. I think I would have a concern in that world if the team kept climbing to like, 150%, 200%. I think at that point, it would be like something's wrong here. Maybe the estimations are off, or the way we're doing the PI objectives is not very, very well. But, for example, the team I'm on at Scaled Agile, like we regularly surpass our PI objective, but we don't continue to climb, right? We tend to stay just over the 100 mark, maybe somewhere between 100 to 110 on the way that we do that. So we are consistent about it, but so I don't worry if it's slightly over and they're consistent. The main thing you want to do is go and reassess those PI objectives, make sure they're well written.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gerald. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Prakash. Good question. Sorry for the long answer. What else? What other questions do people have? I see we have some new people who have joined, so they may have missed some of this. So, anybody else like any other questions in general to SAFe too? Doesn't have to be about what we just talked about. If you have other questions, we can talk about other stuff. Don't be shy.
So you were talking a little bit earlier, Gerald, about the people following the framework, considering it very prescriptive, being very prescriptive in their use of SAFe. Do you think that's becoming more, less? Do you think it's changing? I mean, obviously SAFe adoption is up a lot. Do you think people are getting, they're just like, hey, just kind of read the rule book and this is what I do? Or do you think that people are getting a little more adaptive?
I think it's becoming less. It's funny. It's one of these hard things. It's really difficult to put your finger on some data points as to why this happens. I had coffee, Steve Parry. So I had a cup of coffee with him during the week. And we were talking about SAFe implementations and why, in Singapore, you don't see a large amount of SAFe implementations. And one of his comments to me was that he tends to come across a lot of executives that say, oh, we're different. We do things differently here. So what people think is when they begin to look at SAFe, they begin to think about SAFe as like, well, I want to do things my way. Can I mold SAFe into what I want it to do? But they're not questioning, well, why do you do things that way? Right. So they're just assuming, and it may be the culture of their organization, the politics they work in. Right. So you get that. You get the ideology influence where you have people within the organization that ideologically, are just opposed to SAFe because they want to see something else, or they think it's too big, it's too heavy, because the only thing they've looked at is the front page of the framework, and they've never taken the time to truly understand or educate themselves. So it always seems big and heavy. So there's lots of very superficial arguments from that point of view, that I usually hear that tend to lead down that path. And when people don't educate themselves well enough, you see a lot of them on LinkedIn. And, if you read through the comments, you can begin to tell, well, these people don't truly understand the framework. The other one you get is, around the predictability, around the space, is that they think the framework is, as I said, it's a book you must follow. It's not. It's a framework, right? So it's not, we tell you how PI planning works. We give you the guidance and instructions. If you want to change something, go ahead, but understand what the outcome of PI planning is meant to be. And then understand if you're going to implement certain changes, are you still going to get that same outcome? Right? And if you can, we see people do that. People do add to the framework. At a customer I was at, we added a group of individuals into the program level to help with the administration activities around the train. It wasn't going to stop or impact any outcomes for the train. It added some overhead around people management, but that was okay.
And welcome, Austin. I think just joined as well. We're doing questions and discussion. So
thank you, John.
Other questions?
So John, did that Did
It
that answer the
does.
question? Or do we
Yeah.
explore that?
It does, because I guess you're saying that people are getting more comfortable, but we definitely do see some people who are ideologically opposed to SAFe, right? So I guess even
I
as it
think
becomes
because-
more,
Right. I think because knowledge of the framework is becoming more widespread. And I think because people are starting to see, there's something like 20,000 enterprises across the globe who have now implemented SAFe in varying degrees of success, right? But they've all had success, and so people are beginning to like, well, they must know something we don't. Right. And so I think that is beginning to fuel people to be a little more skeptical when, people are just, admonishing or pushing back on the framework, and they're digging for themselves. And that's the important part, is how can I get you to dig deep enough for yourself? And often that's like, well, at least attend a training class, start with that.
other questions people have? I've got a couple more I'm going to bring up, but other questions or things people would like to comment or ask, Gerald?
Yeah, John, can I ask question, please?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, John and Gerald. Very good discussion. Excellent points. My question is like last 10 years, if SAFe implementations across the world, how many approximately? Can we say around 1,000? Can we say around 1,000 implementation already done by people across the world last 10 years? I'm curious to know about this.
I don't know if we have a metric that talks about how many successful implementations. We could probably run some kind of report that looks at new customer stories in the last 10 years. And if we did, it'll be quite a bit. But the number of implementations, I don't think we have metrics to say how many implementations were done over the last 10 years. Again, one of the things we don't do is we don't go around measuring whether it's a successful implementation, right? So, we don't, we're not like an oversight body where we look at the customer and say, did you implement successfully? We ask them, did you have a set of outcomes you wanted to get, and did you get those? And that's what the customer stories are built around. I think if you look at the customer stories here, you can see on my screen, why is that so slow? I think if you looked at this, I don't know if they have a date marker on them. But I don't think we have anything that allows, there's no real date markers on these to allow this. So I don't know if I really have an answer for that question to say how many in the last 10 years. But, when we look at the, if you look at some of the data points we have, which is, 20,000 enterprises implemented, you have over 1 million people trained globally now. So people don't take on that training for no reason at all. And even if you said, well, 20% of that training is people just taking the training for certification, that's great. That still leaves me 800,000, of people properly certified that are probably implementing SAFe. So again, those sorts of metrics are, tell you that it's a growing and changing market. We see new customers, like one of our recent customers, has been doing SAFe for a little while. We had talk at the SAFe Summit, which was Porsche, and some of the things that they were doing. And so the summits are a great place, or, to get insights to some of the customer stories if you get to attend those. CVS, they've been doing it for, God, 7 or 8 years now. And, they've got like 50 trains running. They've got like over 4,000 people trained. So there are companies that are doing this on a very large scales across and changing their entire organizations. So I don't know if that's the exact answer you were looking for, Shrigesh, but,
Sure.
I don't think I have an exact metric for you.
Sure. No problem. See, because in locally, one of the trainer that, said that, we had done, people across the world have done more than 1,000 implementations. Maybe it is successful, unsuccessful, it is subjective, because we have essential, SAFe and LPM, people customize and they do on their own. I am okay to that. But my point is, let's say, assume hypothetically, because SAFe is there for last 10 years, in the out of 50 years of IT industry approximately, how effectively SAFe as a team have gone ahead and incorporated the lessons learned, best practices, or the challenges in implementations in their content, because the content, the SAFe course content is very good, excellent. It's completely published on the portal freely, openly available to everybody. Have you really gone back and incorporated some of the best practices from the implementations into the content right now?
Yeah, so I think, to broaden that a little bit more is how do we understand the world outside of us in order to create the content, both for the framework and for our training materials, right? And our community platform. One of the things that, that was already underway at Scaled Agile and, the pandemic really accelerated was the focus we had on, a real product management view of the world. When I came on board at Scaled Agile in 2018, when I became an employee, I was around them before that, but when I became an employee there, we were really just at the beginning of beginning to treat the framework with a customer centricity and design thinking. And we were beginning to just treat our training courses the same way. And so we moved Tamara Nation over into a product management role, and we started to create people around her. And she's been really awesome. She's really helped to drive the organization to a way where when we make changes to the course materials and to the framework, that's coming from the research we're doing with customers in the field, whether it's we are talking direct to a particular enterprise, or whether, for example, we are canvassing a cohort of release trained engineers and gathering information. And when we're looking at that information with the same thing the design thinking tells us to do, right? Identify the right problems to solve and identify the right solution for the problems that are important to solve. And so we do that. And so this is why we're starting to come up with much richer and better materials. Up on that website, you can see we just implemented, an LPM. I forget, I'd have to go to the community platform, but it's in the LPM space. We have that. We have organizing around value, because we've seen those as two big areas where people really wanted more information. The content of the training courses, we have constant feedback from those. We have internal channels, and we do get constant feedback from customers that's usually reviewed and looked at by product management to say it's something we want to include or it's something that's not appropriate. The same goes for the framework team. People do submit things back to the framework. Typically, we want that submission to come in writing, first of all. And if it's something that's interest from a product perspective, we'll have a conversation with those people to see how that might become part of the framework, or will it become an article that we'll attach to the framework. So we have different ways of looking at it. But, Scaled Agile itself as an organization since say 2019 through to now has evolved with a product management capability that is, for me, it was like, wow, we've really taken on a different view of the world.
Makes sense. That answer makes sense to me. Thanks for sharing. Can I ask one more question, please?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so while I am seeing from the internet research and all, the data available based on my observation, SAFe has got around 30, 35 or 40% market share in the market. While people, I believe many teams in the world, they're implementing SAFe in their own way, completely personalization, customization. As a SAFe team, we may not be knowing, right, whether somebody in the world, we have 200 countries, somebody else is implementing. We don't have tracking that somebody else is using, because the entire content freely available on internet. There is nothing like confidentiality, secrecy in implementing the framework. The entire content is freely available on, so beautifully narrated on a portal. So if SAFe implementations market share is about 35-40%, whereas all other frameworks, I don't want to name any other frameworks because they complement each other. It is very minimal, 5%, 6%, 7%. what is the specific reason that people across the world have adopted, implemented SAFe from the
So,
portal? Any specific reason why it is going up heavily in the market right now, whereas all other frameworks are very minimal, 5%, 6%, 7%, based on my research on internet?
yeah, I think so. I think a little bit of it comes to, SAFe as a framework. I mean, I don't want to like get into a frame, an a comparison of framework discussions, but compared to other frameworks on the market, we had a framework that had a rich body of content to begin with, right? So when SAFe 1.0 came out, it already had a rich body of content. We continually evolve that. We're now at SAFe 5.0. So the framework never stands still. If you look at Scrum has evolved, but it hasn't evolved at the same rate, right? There's that. Plus, we didn't create just a framework. We created an environment. We created an environment around it, right? So you have training courses, people. You've got a community platform. We have conferences, and so we created this rich world around the framework that helps people to get to know and understand it. But none of those alone create the adoption. I think what people are increasingly are looking at is that the framework is not focused on agility. The framework is focused on giving us business outcomes. So we talk about business agility a lot. And so when you look at the framework, it's focused on changing your organization to get you better outcomes from a business agility perspective. We don't want you to call yourself an agile organization or a lean organization. We want you to use those tools effectively. And that's what the framework is there for. We try to build effective guidance so that you have the best information available to implement. But reading the framework alone won't be enough. Now you consider all the 1 million people that are trained out there, and you consider the capabilities of those individuals. You have a vast body of people now that you can bring or look for to hire into your organization that come with skills and experience. So I think we had a big leg up on the market early on, and I think we didn't squander that opportunity at all. We really pushed that, and we grew a really solid environment around the framework. And if you came to the summit, you would see Inbar's presentation really began to show you that the framework is not the centerpiece of the organization. It's a combination of things now that we look at for the organization. And so that's really how we begin to look at how we treat enterprises now. It's not like, are you adopting the framework? It's, what solution can we help you with?
And maybe I'll jump in a little bit on that, a couple of points. Shrinagesh, for the real world part, so I mean, I've been an Agile practitioner for whatever, 13, 14 years. A lot of what Dean did in the beginning with Scaled Agile came from real implementations and real, people used to just kind of do everything custom when they do large scale Agile. So really a lot of what is in Scaled Agile, it comes from kind of the real world kind of bumps and bruises and really doing this. And I think that kind of people see that because it really does work, where in a lot of cases, a lot of times there'll be a lot of frameworks that others that are kind of a little more theoretical, and they really aren't from the real world kind of, going through the pains of doing this. So I think that Scaled Agile, having that really has given it an edge, because everything that I've done over the years really got incorporated, at least most of it, into Scaled Agile. And the other thing is kind of, I think some of you talked about reading the framework. When people just read the website or read the framework, I call it, having enough information just to be dangerous, right? Because they're like, oh, I read the website or I looked at the framework, but they don't really know what half of the things mean. And then they go and kind of, bring that into their organization, and they inevitably run into trouble, and they blame it on SAFe. They're like, oh, SAFe did this, it doesn't work. It's because they didn't actually take the time to certify or bring their team. So reading the framework alone, I think, even if you're an experienced practitioner, is not going to necessarily get you a good start.
Yeah. So this is what I was talking to and I think I used the wrong word there. I really should have said ecosystem, right? So not environment, right? So that's what Scaled Agile has now begun to create, is an ecosystem. And so this picture you see here is what we just talked about. You can see the framework sits at the center right? But what we've built around it is this, the knowledge and the expertise, the systems of practice and collaborations, the ability to grow yourself in your role with, lots of insightful information and practical experience. So as we build that, this operating system, this is what we help organizations do, is to build these capabilities, around the framework to adopt business agility.
Sure, Gerald, makes sense. Thanks a lot, you and John. Makes sense. Thank you so much.
Welcome. Do
There
we
other
have any other questions?
I'm going to throw you a tough one here, Gerald. So,
Uh-oh.
yeah,
That's why T-Rex is in the background there. He's there for you,
it's
dude.
tough. It may not be tough. We'll see. A lot of organizations, either what I've seen, and we had John on here earlier, so I spent some time at Accenture. A lot of big organizations, right? They either say we're either going SAFe or we're going Spotify. How do you feel about that comparison?
So I was having a little bit of this discussion recently because we still run into this place where organizations say, hey, we're going to do Spotify. But what we generally find is that when we dig, what they're actually implementing is SAFe underneath, but Spotify on top. So people like the names in Spotify. They love the notion of squads and tribes and guilds. And so people love these names, but they don't necessarily, truly understand what Spotify was intended to do. When Spotify created Spotify, what it really was is still, groups of teams that work together in an agile way, but they're not directed. In other words, one day they're working on this, the next day they could be, next they can move on to something thing. So they still had the project mentality. And this is one of the big differentiators for the framework is we organize around value. Right. And that's one of the big things that differentiates us against all of the other frameworks is organizing around value and then implementing the capability. So when you look at the other frameworks, they don't emphasize that. They still emphasize the need for, oh, I've got an initiative, therefore I'll organize some people around that initiative. Well, the initiative's temporary. So again, if you want long-lived agility, you want long-lived teams. And so I don't think we don't particularly worry about Spotify. You'll notice that on our on our websites, etc. We don't provide lots of anti-framework information against other informations, and even internally, we don't do it because it's a no-win argument. You'll never win the ideological argument. And B, it's just not worth it. None of the frameworks really, we own the market for now. I mean, that's not to say other frameworks won't improve, but over the last 3 years, we've gone from somewhere around the late 20% mark up to now 35%, and we're just continuing to grow. The number of enterprises implementing continues to grow, the number of people trained. So as I said, Scaled Agile did not squander its opportunity to get out in the marketplace and push ahead. And, right now, the framework team is working on the next generation of the framework, and we're going to be having conversations about artificial intelligence and data analytics and things, in the coming year.
Good. I see some comments there. Austin said, very true. I experienced that with a bank. Whereas in the past, they called it Spotify, but the framework underneath it was SAFe. Ridiculous. And Stringeresh said, Spotify is a case study, not a framework. Do you agree?
That is true. That is true. Spotify, if you go look at it, you can go find the stuff on YouTube. I just can't remember the name, but there are people who no longer Spotify will tell you Spotify does not do Spotify. It was never developed as a framework. It was developed as a way of working, but it never evolved into a set of practices. People adopt it by going and looking at what they did, and there's a little bit of documentation, but there's not many people who are trained. You can't find a certification in Spotify. You can go to some of the partners, and they can provide you some training course and give you a certification, but it's very inconsistent.
Yeah. I got a question, Gerald.
Yeah, hi, Richard.
Yeah, hi.
Are you allowed to ask me questions?
No, just want to go back from the presentation deck on the sixth one, which is stop overloading organizational capacity. SAFe guidance, as one of them says, empower leaders to make stop doing decisions. So my question now is, how does decentralized decision making fit into the SAFe model?
So decentralized decision making is really important, from the concept, because if all decisions have to go up, then we won't have flow, right? You'll just get delays. And so it becomes really important at every level to understand, well, what decisions can be made at the team level, at the program level, and at the portfolio level, depending if that's your configuration, right? And so the general premise of decision making is it's about people. Well-educated people with a clear mission and knowledge of the work should make those decisions that have small time box, minimal impact, et cetera, right? So we give you a criteria. And so we want to make sure that, we empower teams to make decisions on things that are appropriate for them to make decisions on. And the same with product management, right? So we want to make sure that the art leadership, product management, architecture, et cetera, is empowered to make local decisions about, what the users want, right? Strategic decisions need to go to the portfolio level. And so we need to have, something in place where portfolio, what is the criteria by which something becomes a strategic decision? In the framework, we often talk about, this notion of a program epic or a solution epic. This is where product management realizes I've got something really big. It doesn't quite fit the criteria of the decision, the decision criteria that allows me to make the decision. So I push it to the portfolio. They review it and they either give it back to me and let me run with it, or they put it through the portfolio Kanban. So decentralized decision-making, and the reason why it's at principle number 8 is really, really important, because we want to, did I say principle number 8? It is, yeah, principle number 8, right? Because knowledge workers is number 9. So we really want to make sure that that is something that's empowered. All good agile teams should have some level of decentralized decision-making. And that's just, that goes against what organizations typically do. Organizations are not structured that way. Or, people are not put into roles that way. And so it does, that's one of the things that is often a difficult pill to swallow for organizations.
Cool. Thanks, Gerald.
Other questions? Comments, thoughts? Okay,
John.
Go ahead. Yep.
Yeah, I just want to know, would we have more of this happening? Because I haven't seen SAFe meetups, and this is the first time I'm joining. So do we have it regular, or?
We do them pretty much every month. We take off often for like the holidays. So maybe December we might take off, and then sometimes over the summer we'll take off a few months. But other than that, we do them pretty much year round. So
Okay,
yeah,
that's awesome.
and to
Thank
keep
you.
those coming, you'll see Gerald and a lot of other speakers coming periodically to talk about different topics and things going on in SAFe.
And Prakash, we run SAFe meetups on a global basis, so you can always look at other time zones if they're not too far away, or you're willing to, deal with the time zone difference, and you can see other SAFe meetups running in different things. So up on the community platform, you can start to see that information, and so you can get an idea of what meetups are running where. So I think there's a SAFe meetup. If you look in the meetups, group, you can start to see the different SAFe meetups that are run. So you can find them. I'm starting to do SAFe meetups. Probably, I'll do more for John here, but we're doing them in Australia now. We've got a dedicated team. We've got our Japanese team that do them on a regular basis in Japan, but that's all in Japanese. So only Thomas, who was here, will be able to understand that one. In China, they do them as well. So we speak at all of these on a regular basis, but we also want, as John has had in the past, customers to come in and speak, and people with different opinions and views. We don't want it to be just all about the theory and the framework, right? We want it to be a little broader.
Awesome. This is helpful. Thank you, Gerald. Thank you, John.
Maybe one other question for you, Gerald. You mentioned AI. Obviously, I do a lot in blockchain. How is Scaled Agile incorporating some of these new technologies? Is there a thought process around that?
Yeah, without going into it too much, because I'm not allowed.
Okay.
So I think what we are looking for now is, how do I mean this? When you look at the past decade, you know, AI has really screamed ahead in terms of what's going on in the marketplace. And that's because increasing, you know, over the decades, we've seen increasing power in computing. You know, you've seen cloud computing and IoT come along. And then, you know, the next big thing that was behind that was data and data analytics. So big data, data analytics. AI now has everything it needs to be more successful. And because AI needs large amounts of data, you know, and it needs an infrastructure that allows it to connect to anywhere to pull data. So both cloud and big data have really begun to enable AI. And so I think for us as the framework, we look at it from the perspective of how will we now provide guidance to enterprises that are implementing, you know, or that are implementing, you know, in this digital age, innovative products. How are they going to have guidance on how to build AI into that SAFe implementation? So you can think about how would product management now begin to use AI algorithms to pull, you know, to pull trends from data, you know, to get insights, so that they can make better product decisions. How will we use AI to look at the continuous delivery pipeline, like Porsche talked about, that they use AI, you know, internally to improve their development pipeline and their development capability, but they build AI into their vehicles as well. And some of that AI just collects data and brings it back to Porsche for analysis. Some of that AI is active in the vehicle and constantly making decisions, you know, based on the data it's pulling from the vehicle and the driving patterns. So, you know, so for them, you know, they have to figure out that at the time they're developing that capability. So if they're developing the in-car systems, they have to figure out, well, how am I going to put AI into this? Remember, AI is a tool, right? So AI is a tool to be used, you know, to provide insight. So we're not building the algorithm. So Scaled Agile is not going to tell you how to build AI algorithms, but we are going to give you insight to, well, where are the appropriate places in the framework where we'd want to see AI incorporated. Think about it like DevOps, right? You know, one of the things we say about DevOps is that it's not, you know, that you must have it. It has to be a capability of every agile release train. That's the catchphrase we have. You can really see in the future that AI is going to now be a capability of every SAFe implementation, whether it be at the portfolio level all the way down to the teams.
Yes. Okay. Well, is there a time frame when this is going to kind of be released, Gerald?
Not really at the moment.
Right.
It's
Okay.
probably. I'm not going to cross that line. Dean
Okay.
promised me not to. I'm doing a presentation for Scaled Agile India, and my topic is succeeding in the age of AI with SAFe. So I'm hoping by the time, you know, I get to that in the next few weeks, that I'll be able to incorporate some of the first draft material from the framework team into my presentation. You know, other than I've got my own thoughts I can put into it, but I'm hoping I can include a few snippets from them. So I'll be circling back with them to see if I can pull something for that. But I probably don't think we will see it in real weight till next year, early next year sometime.
Okay. Any last questions? Thanks, Gerald, for that. Any last questions or comments before we wrap up here? Great session, Gerald, as usual. And anything else anybody wanted to ask Gerald here, or any other comments before we wrap up? Going once, going twice. All right, I think we are at a wrap. Well, thanks, Gerald. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the day, great rest of the evening, and we'll talk to you in the next one.
Thanks,
Okay,
John.
thanks, guys. Nice to see everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you,
Goodbye.
Gerald. Thank you, John.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
Asim. Thanks, John. See you later.
Thanks. See ya.